Good morning, everybody. It is time for the Stokastic MLB Strategy Show. Massive MLB slate today, 14 games. So it's going to be myself and Adam Scherer breaking it down, which I'm pretty excited about. Adam and I chopping it up in the morning. Adam, of course, coming off of his big win over at the MMA final. Today, though, 14 games. Adam, it's time for you to start spending some of that money you won back in the MLB streets. How are you feeling about tonight's slate?
Well, I feel like I got off to a good start at that yesterday when I gave back around 10 grand. So excited to try and keep that going.
What went wrong for you yesterday?
Everything. My lineups sucked, both in terms of how they performed and in how I built them. I ended up with just basically jamming Kansas City and then just mixing other teams in with them. I thought they were a good stack. I don't know why I had as much of them as I did. I need to actually figure out what happened there. So that, I didn't have a lot of the Yankees. I didn't have a lot of the, popular offenses that did well. So yeah. And then also just happened to play a couple. So I played the MMA or not MMA, the MLB qualifier. Obviously I didn't win that. So that's $2 grand lost. Played the $88. Didn't really do well in that. So lost money there. Didn't do well in head to heads. It was just across the board. Just got my ass kicked.
Wow. I've heard of better ways that you've spent $10,000, and one of them is not losing at DFS. But we move on to today's slate, and once again, nearly every single team in action tonight. We also got double headers going on, so all kinds of things happening. Starting with the Milwaukee Brewers against the Pittsburgh Pirates, we've got Corbin Burnes on the mound for Milwaukee. The strikeout rate, the peripheral stats, as per usual, everything is terrific for Corbin Burnes. The only question is, how much of him do we want to play? Right now on DK, he's projected for 33% ownership. Over on FanDuel, he's projected for 12% ownership. I think he's going to end up probably being higher owned than what we currently have him projected at. But regardless, he's pretty clearly the top pitching option on the slate for me.
Yeah, fantastic spot against the Pirates. And also just a price tag that is too cheap. 10-1, obviously it's not free, but it's cheaper than Corbin Burnes should be facing the Pirates in Pittsburgh. He has a 32.8% strikeout percentage this year, 2.77 xFIP, 3 flat implied run total for the Pirates. It's just a fantastic spot for Burnes. And, it's still pretty easy to work with a $10,100 price tag and get players that you like elsewhere in your lineup too.
Yeah, I think Burnes is the guy to pay up for on the slate. I'm kind of curious to see what ends up happening with DeGrom. Right now, DeGrom is also picking up a lot of ownership, and I wouldn't be surprised if that comes down a little bit closer to lock, and that could boost the ownership of Corbin Burnes. I just highly doubt he's only going to be in 33% of the field's lineups when he's in such good is in such good of a spot against the Pirates. On the other side, Bryce Wilson is going to be pitching for Pittsburgh. I think it's fair to assume that you're not going to have interest in him. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, that's a pretty safe assumption.
But what is your level of interest in stacking against Bryce Wilson, where this is a fairly pitcher-friendly park, but the Milwaukee Brewers, the second highest top stack odds for us in the top stack tool?
Yeah, and they're not getting crazy ownership right now either, which is to be expected. You have a 13-game slate. So ownership in general is going to be pretty spread out. Wilson this year is a lot of 193 expected ISO to lefties, 155 to righties. If you go back to the start of last season, 225 expected ISO to lefties, 171 to righties. Just not a particularly good pitcher. And this Milwaukee team does have plenty of power. You mentioned it being a tough park to hit in. That certainly is true. So that, downgrades them a little bit. But, Rowdy Tellez, Christian Yelich, Willy Adames, those guys are all still going to look pretty good. Wong offers some value at second base. Renfroe's got plenty of power, although he is 5K. So I think that the field sort of just has it correct. We have them with a 7% chance of being the top stack, 7% aggregate ownership projection. One thing that does stand out a little bit is that they're not quite as cheap as they have been in the past. I mentioned Wong being relatively inexpensive, but Adames at 5,100, that's a pretty healthy price tag. Renfro at 5K, Tellez at 4,800, that's one of the more expensive price tags we've seen on him recently as well. So that does make them maybe a little bit more difficult to get to.
Yeah. So in terms of the Brewers, they do look like one of the better teams to get to on this slate. I think it's hard to really say I want to go crazy with any one individual stack, but in terms of trying to figure out who the best offenses are and bundling them together, the Brewers are going to be one of those against Bryce Wilson. Next game we have to hit on here, Seattle Mariners and the New York Yankees. Two pretty quality pitching options on the mound, at least from a real life standpoint. Logan Gilbert for the Mariners and then Jameson Taillon for the Yankees. Neither of them have been really high strikeout pitchers, and they also, well, Logan Gilbert in particular is a really difficult matchup. Jameson Taillon, obviously a little bit easier of a matchup against the Mariners and potentially not going to have Julio Rodriguez, but he hasn't had all that much strikeout upside. So do either of these pitchers stand out to you in this spot?
No, for a couple of reasons. Well, for the reasons you mentioned. So Jameson Taillon, decent real life pitcher, but not getting a lot of strikeouts. He's only struck out 20.5% of hitters this year. 3.75 xFIP is good, but he's pretty much correctly priced at 8,500. You do get a watered down Seattle lineup with no Julio Rodriguez. On the other side, you mentioned the difficult matchup for Gilbert. He's 9,300. So again, pretty much a correct price tag on him. And then you get the difficult matchup with the Yankees. But on top of those concerns, the fact that so many pitchers are just completely mispriced on this slate just makes it so difficult to get to them. Like, if you had perfect pricing across the board, then sure, maybe you take some chances on Logan Gilbert's talent or on Jameson Taillon in a decent matchup against the Mariners. But when you look at the other pitchers that are available, Lucas Giolito is $6,800 against the Royals. Spencer Strider is less expensive than both of these pitchers. Christian Javier is basically the same price point facing the Red Sox, who are potentially going to have a completely different team by the time lock rolls around tonight. But either way, it's not a great lineup. So that's not to mention guys like Burns. So it's just really difficult for me to want to get to these guys when I can just do things like save money and play Lucas Giolito or Spencer Strider.
And then as far as the offenses are concerned, these are two of the better pitchers on the slate, even if they aren't in the best fantasy matchups or the most fantasy friendly pitchers this season. Do either of the offenses really stand out to you?
Not really. The Yankees are certainly one of those offenses that you can always get to, but on a 13-game slate, I'm less likely to target somebody like Logan Gilbert just because ownership across the board is relatively low. And so I don't necessarily need to be targeting a pitcher that talented. For the Mariners, I do think it's kind of interesting. Taillon's not somebody that misses bats. We already mentioned that. Against lefties this year, he has allowed a 188 expected ISO. Jesse Winker gets a very nice park upgrade here going into Yankee Stadium. He's only $3,200. So I do really like Jesse Winker individually. And then I think guys like Adam Frazier, Carlos Santana, JP Crawford do offer some value. Cal Raleigh's got some power as well. So Seattle's kind of interesting to me from a left-handed power hitting in Yankee Stadium standpoint. But on a 13-game slate, I think it's still difficult to say that they'd be a priority.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there. And moving on to the next game now, trying to have a little bit of pace because we have so many games to talk about, but it's the New York Mets, the Washington Nationals. The big talking point, the big story of the slate is going to be Jacob deGrom making a season debut, coming off what I believe is a fractured shoulder that caused him to miss more than half the season. So Jacob deGrom, he's made a handful of minor league starts. He is currently expected to have some ownership. We have him projected for about 24% ownership over on DK. FanDuel, we have him projected for only 3% ownership. What are you expecting from him from a pitch count perspective? And is it enough to make him a viable tournament option?
I'm expecting him to be limited. He threw 67 pitches in his most recent rehab start. And then also it's Jacob deGrom. Like, the guy has been injured nonstop with one thing or another for the last, at least 2 years, including this one. So I would it's the Mets. They are an incompetent organization. Maybe they'll just run him out there for 100 pitches, but I'd be surprised. So I think it's a situation where you can still play deGrom because even if he's going to throw, let's call it 80 pitches, he can strike out 10 dudes in 5 innings and be a good play. The thing that I think is going to make it a little difficult right now, the ownership, where you're talking about somebody that I don't want to say deGrom doesn't have a ceiling because he still does. Like, he's just so good, but he doesn't have the same sort of ceiling that he would if we were expecting him to be fully stretched out and not be on a short leash. But also when you talk about those other pitchers, it's not like yesterday's slate where you just had a bunch of pitchers where you're kind of just like, yeah, they're okay, but I don't love them. Here you need deGrom to beat Burns. You need him to beat Javier, Gossman, Strider, Giolito. Like, these are all really good strikeout pitchers. Tristan McKenzie has good strikeout stuff. So if he's low owned, like if that ownership comes down, then I don't hate the idea, particularly in larger field tournaments, of kind of just saying like, okay, you know, maybe if things just go wrong with these other pitchers, I can get there with like 22, 23 points from DeGrom and, you know, a good start. But with the ownership right now, it's kind of just like I would rather go to 33% own Burns and know that if he's pitching well, he's going to get an extra like 2 innings on the ground probably.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to consider DeGrom, especially if he's actually going to be popular, which we currently have in our projections. Like I said, this is something that could very much change as we get more information over the course of the day. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out Live Before Lock and Deeper Dive to see what changed in some of these ownership projections. But if you're to tell me that we get a really low owned DeGrom, maybe I'll roll the dice with him in large field tournaments. Not at 24%. That's too much for me.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of at that ownership. I just don't really know what I don't understand how the like risk reward like equation works. It's like, okay, well, a quarter of the field's going to roster this guy that my educated guess is going to throw around 80 pitches or something. Could he do well? Sure. But could he also just, you know, happen to strike out 5 guys and still be done after his 5 innings and just kind of get destroyed by several other pitchers? So I do think that ownership comes down. My guess is that in our first run, we kind of just didn't account for potential restrictions. But for the sake of, you know, conversation, if he were to continue to be projected in the same ownership range as guys like Burns and Javier and Gossman and Strider and Giolito, I'm just going to play more of those guys.
All right, we've got a super chat here from Julio G, and then we'll talk about the merits of the Mets offense. Julio's asking us, how many uniques do each of you use when making lineups? How do you calculate your own randomness? I know Adam has his own calculation for NBA. So I'm good with 1 unique for MLB. And then just the way that I have my lineup set up with different with different stack percentages and whatnot. It's not like my lineups are generally crazy similar to each other anyway. But I usually just have the Fantasy Cruncher set to the 1 unique. What do you use for your unique setting?
I use 3 for MLB. But again, it's the same answer as other sports. It all depends on like and you touched on it, like the rest of your process. The whole idea is there's no correct number on uniques. It's a matter of just getting Fantasy Cruncher to spit out lineups that look the way you want them to look. The reason that I do use more uniques in MLB is that you don't need the optimal lineup. Like, you're never going to have almost never going to have the actual optimal lineup in MLB. So I do like trying to get spread out a little bit more. Whereas, you know, like a sport like basketball, there's just not as much variance. Like, it's a lot easier to build very close to the optimal lineups, or the what ends up as the optimal lineup. So I don't use as many there, but I use 3. And as far as randomness goes, I do it the same way. Standard deviation divided by projection, basically.
All right. So there you have it for Julio. If you have any other questions about how to use Fantasy Crunch or anything like that, message me on Twitter and I'll help you. We have a bunch of videos that Alex has made about how he uses Fantasy Cruncher, and I could send those to you as well if you have more questions. Getting back to this game and talking about the Mets offense, Corey Abbott is on the mound for Washington. We have almost no information on him. He has pitched a total of 4 innings at the big leagues this year for his career. He's pitched 21 innings at the big leagues. This appears to be a bullpen game. His 4 innings have all come in relief. Out of his 10 big league appearances, only 1 of them have been starts. He has made some appearances in the minor leagues this year, also either short starting stints or mostly out of the bullpen. So what do you make of the Mets offense against what looks like a Nationals bullpen?
Yeah, I don't think it's a true bullpen game. Like, he went 4 innings in his last start at AAA, but I agree you're going to get several relievers here. I think it looks like a pretty good spot. It's, you know, bullpen games are never super appealing, but this is also a pitcher that just doesn't project to be particularly good at the major league level. Steamer projects him to strike out 22.6% of hitters with an 11% walk percentage, 5.11 FIP, 1.7 home runs per 9. And we know the Mets are a really good offense as well. So I think getting to the Mets certainly makes a lot of sense here. We have them as the top stack at 10%, 7.5% aggregate ownership. They are expensive, so you're going to kind of run into issues with the top of the order potentially. Like, the bottom of the order is fine. There's some value there, but they're also not very good. But the top, you know, Nimmo 4,900, Marte 59, Lindor 55, Alonso 58, Daniel Vogelbach, the same position as Alonso, also a problem. So maybe not the easiest team to stack in terms of salary, and then also potentially having the 4 and 5 hitters play the same position. But I do think it's a good spot. I do want to get there.
Yeah, and they currently do have the top stack odds overall on the slate for us. The only team picking up north of 10% top stack odds. And the next highest team I mentioned before, Milwaukee Brewers, they're at 6.6. So we do have the Mets as being a very strong stack currently in our top stacks tool. So we'll see, depending how long Corey Abbott works in the game or whatever kind of reports we get on what kind of depth he's going to get, I think the longer he pitches, the better things look for the Mets. Next team to talk about here, Toronto Blue Jays, Tampa Bay Rays. Kevin Gausman on the mound for Toronto. And sorry, Tyler, I just realized I messed up when I wrote in the strikeout numbers there for Gausman. I think this is something copied and pasted incorrectly from yesterday. But Gausman's been really good this year, and especially as of late. He had that one weird blip. One weird blip. I don't try to say words I'm not familiar with that are not usually part of my vernacular, and it comes out weird. But anyway, one weird blip on the radar for Kevin Gausman, who got off to a really good start to the season, had an issue with tipping his pitches, where all of a sudden he just saw a lot of hard contact, wasn't generating the same amount of swing and misses. But now we're overall for the year, 3.3 ERA, 3.62 expected ERA. He appears to have evened stuff out. So the question with Gausman is, I think everybody's aware that he's at least in play, but how does he stack up compared to the other top arms on the slate, like Corbin Burns, like Christian Javier, Spencer Strider, and how much does that make you want to get to, Gausman?
So one thing that meant, totally forgot about it. I just saw a tweet that reminded me, because I'd seen somebody in chat say that Scherzer kind of struggled with the Nats last night. DeGrom could do the same, which, yeah, sure, but that's not the correct reason. But also, Nats lineup could be absolute garbage tonight. John Morosi just tweeted and said the Nats are in the process of calling up multiple minor leaguers to the major league club, a sign that trades are imminent. It sounds like Soto. We might get Soto news during this show, but there's a good chance that, like, the most recent rumor is that Soto and Josh Bell are going to San Diego. So, like, there's a chance that the Nats team that we've said all year has 3 good hitters now has like 1 or maybe even 0 by the time this game starts. So again, the pitch count concerns on DeGrom don't change, but this could be a god awful Nats lineup. As far as Gausman goes, I think he's just another good pitcher in the mix. Like, he doesn't look a whole lot different to me than guys like Christian Javier. Right now, he's projected for 23% ownership. I think that's fine. We have him with a 17% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. He's facing Tampa Bay in a very favorable pitcher's park. Rays have a 3.3 implied run total. Not the best lineup, still missing Wander Franco, they'll be missing Kiermaier and Zunino all season. So just kind of a middle of the road offense. They did designate Brett Phillips for assignment. And the only reason I mentioned that is that dude strikes out a ridiculous amount of the time. So not having him in the lineup is a downgrade for Gausman. But yeah, it's a good spot. Gausman's 9,500. He's a good pitcher, 27.9% strikeout percentage, 2.76 xFIP. I assume I'll get 20 to 30% Gausman tonight.
Yeah, and the latest that we have from here, John Morosi's been reporting, it does seem that Juan Soto is going to be traded likely to the Padres somewhat soon. So this is going to be a really bad lineup. Nelson Cruz, he's looked a little bit washed this year, but what would be the purpose for them keeping him at this point in the season either? I mean, if they're going to trade Josh Bell and Juan Soto, you know what also is going to be funny as I'm thinking through this? The Nationals are going to end up getting back a top prospect who's older than Soto or something like that in this trade, which is also going to be really funny.
Well, and the most recent report from what the Padres were giving up, obviously they were giving up some prospects, but it wasn't anything special. Like, they were holding on to a lot of their top guys. The most recent I saw was like CJ Abrams headlining it, which, like, cool. He's 21. He's already in the majors, or been up and down in the majors. But like, Mackenzie Gore wasn't in it. Several of their other top prospects weren't in it. So I don't know. It kind of seems like the Nats are about to get fleeced, and I'm completely here for it.
So, what's funny about this also, looking at because John Morosi just had a tweet. The reason that the Cardinals are apparently bowing out of this, they don't want to include Dylan Carlson in a Juan Soto trade. If that's
they don't want to give up Carlson along with their top prospects. They want to do one or the other.
All right.
Yeah, and I agree. Like, you're just pretend you're replacing Dylan Carlson with Juan Soto directly. Just do it.
There's no prospect that any teams overvalue prospects in draft picks way too much sometimes. Like, if Dylan Carlson's really a sticking point in a Juan Soto trade, I mean, just fuck off, St. Louis Cardinals. It's just the dumbest shit ever. Like, have fun being a borderline playoff team this year.
Yeah, exactly. Like, It's crazy. Somebody in chat said, yes, it's too risky to play any Nats. The deadline's going to be come and gone by the time the slate rolls around. We'll know who's in the lineup, who's playing. Like yesterday was actually the riskier day from a DFS standpoint because you could just get guys traded mid-game. But there is a very good chance that like this Nats lineup is just a AAA lineup tonight.
Yeah, and I think the trade deadline, it's in a couple. Oh, no, it's at 6 p.m. tonight. But either way, an hour before the slate locks. So we'll know ahead of time. It's also something that's going to impact. Don't be surprised if there's some pitchers that are facing like quadruple A lineups of all backups and become really good looking plays later on in the day. So another reason, just check out the content later. We really know all of these lineups and what they look like, because more so on this day than ever, it's almost an NBA type slate where there's going to be weird lineup stuff happening that we're not expecting. So a lot is going to change by the time we get to lock for this slate.
Yeah, we're going to get some lineups looking like the Royals in Toronto.
Yeah, or the Cardinals or any of those teams. Everybody's going to look like they just traveled to Canada and half their team wasn't vaccinated, because there's going to be teams that are selling, or teams like the Red Sox that are buying and selling at the same time, and none of the trades make sense.
Yeah, I did like a double take. It was like Christian Vasquez to Houston. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. The Red Sox are throwing in the towel. Tommy Pham to the Red Sox. Yeah. Like, what are we doing?
I was also really confused by it. And then they traded for Reese McGuire also, I guess, because they needed a catcher, but whatever. I don't know what the hell they're doing. Drew Rasmussen's pitching for the Tampa Bay Rays today. I am not a massive fan of Rasmussen. I was coming into the year, but he just hasn't really been able to put it together. There's a crazy low total in this game, only set at 7 runs. Also, the juice is on the under. So neither of the teams are expected to score very many runs in this game. Sub 4 implied run total for the Toronto Blue Jays. I don't want to roster Rasmussen, but I can't really play Toronto in this spot either. There's just better offenses to get to.
Yeah, I think Rasmussen's a solid pitcher. I don't think he's particularly good from a DFS standpoint, at least right now. 20.5% strikeout percentage, 3.73 xFIP. He's basically Jameson Taillon. Like, their numbers are almost identical. So it's not a pitcher that like I love targeting against, but it's not one that I can roster very easily in DFS either. I do think Toronto fits into the category of, offenses that are good enough that you can play them against anybody. But the issue they run into here, in addition to the tough matchup with Rasmussen, is they're also in Tropicana Field, which is an extremely not friendly place to hit. They only have a 3.7 implied run total. So I'm with you. I don't anticipate really getting to the Blue Jays or to Rasmussen.
All right. So moving on to the next game. But first, shout out to Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's show. If you guys have not signed up at Prize Picks yet, you could do it using the promo code AWESEMO, where they are then going to give you up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. Really good way to help start building your bankroll over at Prize Picks. Also, we've got a lot of tools over at awesemo.com or Stokastic. Damn, screw that. I didn't screw that up at all for like a month. And lately, I've been messing it up a lot lately. Stokastic.com. We've got player projections, which mirror some of the projections over at Prize Picks. So you could use those to project over-unders for players. But then in addition, we've also got our player props tool over at Odd Shopper. So you can look at all the different strikeout props for pitchers and see their projected odds of hitting the over-unders on stuff like their strikeouts prop. All really useful resources to help building some winning player prop cards over on Prize Picks. So also, don't forget when you're signing up, use that promo code AWESEMO to get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. All right, moving on with the rest of this slate, and the next game to talk about is the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Cleveland Guardians. A couple of good pitchers on the mound here, Adam. Tristan McKenzie for Arizona, Zach Gallen for why do I have Zach? Oh, no, sorry. Tristan McKenzie for Cleveland, Zach Gallen for Arizona. Of these two pitchers, which do you like the most?
I think they're kind of similar in that they're both good pitchers, and I think they're both going to be difficult to really get to today. So it makes them decent tournament options if you do just need a low-owned pitcher. With it being a slate of this size, I don't think that's going to happen all that often just because hitter ownership is going to be spread out enough. But for McKenzie, he's got the better matchup going up against Arizona, but he's also really expensive. Like, the guy's $300 less expensive than Corbin Burns, and McKenzie is good. He's cut back his walk percentage, but the strikeouts have taken a bit of a hit as well. Still a 24.2% strikeout percentage, however, so still plenty of strikeout upside there. It's just, how can you really prioritize Tristan McKenzie when you can find $300 for Corbin Burns, or you can pay less money for your favorite of Javier, Gausman, Strider, Giolito, Anderson, if you wanted to go there. So I think he's he's going under-owned relative to his top 2 pitcher percentage, but it's also going to be difficult to build around him. And then similarly with Zach Gallen, he's a good pitcher. He's reasonably priced at 8K, 23.5% strikeout percentage, 3.78 xFIP. But the problem is that he's facing Cleveland, which is a team that's very difficult to strike out. But on top of that, you can find $300 for the guy with the highest strikeout percentage on the entire slate in Spencer Strider. You can save $1,200 and go to the guy with the fifth highest strikeout percentage in Lucas Giolito. It's just really difficult to actually prioritize Gallen. So I think both pitchers are talented. I don't hate it if they just end up in a lineup here or there, but it's going to be really difficult to actually get to a lot of them.
Yeah, and the offenses I have no interest in from the pitching standpoint. I mean, if you have a couple of them spread out across lineups, cool, they're really low owned, but it's not going to be priorities for me. The offenses I definitely don't want to get to, though.
Yeah, same boat. I mean, Jose Ramirez is always playable, and neither team is expensive, which is nice, but nothing really stands out. I mean, so I guess the one thing I would point out with McKenzie, he has had some power issues this year. 205 expected ISO to righties, 166 to lefties. But it's still a situation where, yeah, maybe if this were like a 7-8 game slate, I could make a stronger case for grabbing some, Varsho or Walker or Marte or Thomas or something. But on a slate of this size, they're just still not going to end up looking like priorities. On the other side for Gallen, 143 expected ISO to lefties, 152 to righties. Jose Ramirez is always a solid option, but not as much of a priority tonight as he normally is. So mostly I just doubt that I get to a lot of this game.
Yeah, I think I see it the exact same way. A lot of stuff that, like, the pitchers, good pitchers, but there's better pitching options. And since the pitchers are good, the offenses don't look all that great. But the next game to talk about, there is for sure going to pitcher that we like because Spencer Strider's on the mound. He has been a chalk pitcher for a lot of games in a row because DraftKings cannot figure out the price on this guy. He's been lights out. He is one of the higher strikeout rates in all of baseball, striking out 37.2% of the hitters he faces. And he's $8,300 over on DraftKings. FanDuel also $8,300. Why can't sites price him correctly? It seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, I have no idea. I'm also honestly confused why we only have him with a 16% chance of being a top 2 scoring pitcher, because the guy's got the highest strikeout percentage on this slate by 4 points over Corbin Burns. As a starter this year, so this isn't even including the time he was coming out of the bullpen, Strider has struck out 36.4% of hitters with a 2.57 xFIP. He, for a while, wasn't going overly deep into games, but that hasn't been a thing anymore. 90 pitches, 6 innings his last time out. 2 starts ago, he had a rough start against Washington. Prior to that, 103, 100, 93, 95 pitches through 106 pitches, 2 starts before that. So there's not even the pitch count concerns anymore. I don't understand why he doesn't have a higher top pitcher percentage. I definitely don't understand why he's not like $2,000 more expensive on DraftKings. I don't know how you get away from Spencer Strider at this price. Like, you can have whatever concerns you want about him. Not that I'm even agreeing that they're warranted, but chat always does the thing where you get to the best pitching on the slate and they say like, well, what if they pitch bad? And like, you're just getting such a discount that whatever made up things you don't like about Spencer Strider don't even matter because they priced him down so much.
Yeah. And let's see, what is the most likely? I'm trying to look through his game log and see what it is that people could be concerned about with Strider. It's hard to find. People are going to say he only had 6 strikeouts in his last start against the Phillies. All right, maybe. He's just so mispriced. It's crazy to me. He should be like $2,000 more expensive just based on his strikeout rate, because he's a type pitcher. And by the way, he's a phenomenal real life pitcher, but he's even better for fantasy because he's striking out 2 out of every 5 hitters he faces. So really difficult to get away from Spencer Strider for me. And I have no interest in stacking against him with the Phillies, regardless of Strider's ownership. Is that going to be the same for you when it comes to Phillies offense?
Yeah, and it's also, a bit of a watered down lineup for Philly since they still don't have Bryce Harper. So their active roster right now only has a 98 WRC plus with a 22.5% strikeout percentage. I don't see a way I get to the Phillies, and I just want a lot of Spencer Strider.
All right. And then as far as the Phillies go, it looks like it's going to be a bullpen game for them. Mark Appel is expected to pitch some middle innings, but ultimately this is just going to be the bullpen doing a lot of the work for them. As for the Atlanta Braves offense, we currently have them with 5.5% top stack odds. That seems low, but with this being a 14-game slate, that is still the 3rd highest mark on the slate. They are expected to be fairly popular with over 7% ownership here. What are you going to do with the Braves in a bullpen game against the Phillies?
I do like getting to the Braves. Again, bullpen games kind of suck, but 6% chance of being the top stack, 7% aggregate ownership. They are expensive, so that is a deterrent, but at the same time, the bottom of the order is not very expensive. It's mostly just the top, like we talked about with the Mets. And then also the pitching pricing is just so bad on this slate. I mean, you can roster 2 of the top 5 strikeout pitchers on the slate for a combined like $14,000 or $15,000 on DraftKings. So salary is not going to be a huge deterrent, I don't think. So I like getting to the Braves. I'll take my chances, in a bullpen game. They have enough power in this lineup that I certainly want to be there.
You don't agree that his price is actually too high?
That is probably the most insane thing I've ever read.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what that take could possibly be, and it's kind of hard to wrap my head around it. So his strikeout rate at home is, listen to his numbers at home compared to on the road. His strikeout rate, they're both really good, but at home, Strider's a 37.8% K rate and a 1.42 FIP this year. That seems good to me.
Right. The actual conversation is whether or not Spencer Strider should be more than Corbin Burns.
Or do we want to roster like 40% of Strider or 60%? It's not, is he too expensive?
Right. Yeah. You could make Spencer Strider 10,500 on the slate and he's still going to be popular.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll be interested to see whatever the counterpoint is in here. And by the way, actually some good points being made in chat right here. Apparently Noah Syndergaard, there's a good chance he's traded. And why would the Angels hold on to him? He's currently scheduled to start for them. Very good chance that is not the starting pitcher for the Angels. So we'll hit on
I hope so, because I don't really feel like playing Oakland, but every time Syndergaard pitches, I end up jamming in whoever he's playing.
Hey, we'll get those stolen bases at some point in the game. That's actually something I considered early in the day. I like looking up the stolen base props against him early in the day. And then I was thinking like, is there going to be a bullpen game? And then I have to deal with not getting good numbers for stolen bases, or else I like to hit on some of those props. But moving on to the rest.
King of Smack thinks that Strider should be $7K at the most. I guess he just thinks there should be a pitcher ceiling of $7,000 because Strider should literally be like the most expensive pitcher on any slate that he's on, or at least very close to it.
So the 8,300 price tag is already broken enough on FanDuel and DraftKings. This is a 14-game slate. If he was 7,000, what would his ownership be? 70% in the $15?
At least.
He shouldn't be 7,000. Sorry, King of Smack. Disagree. Tigers Twins is the next game we have here. 2 pretty mediocre, actually bad pitchers. Chris Archer on the mound for Detroit.
How many innings would? So if you want to make Strider 7K, he'd like if he was like a 3-inning reliever, he'd be 7K.
Potentially. And he could, I wouldn't play him if he was only pitching 3 innings, but I wouldn't be surprised if he pitched. If you think he's going to be maxing it out, like what's he throwing, 103, 104 miles per hour?
Right. Oh, I didn't even thought about that. But yeah, I was just trying to think like if he was 7K, what would be his pitch count restriction where he wouldn't be rostered? And I think it would be like he's going to be limited to less than 3 innings. If you told me Spencer Strider is throwing 4 innings, I think I'd still playing him at 7K.
All right. My dad will not stop calling me. I'm texting him on a show and he's calling me. I'm sure it's nothing urgent. It's like he's picking up a sandwich and wants to know if I want something. It's whatever it is he's calling me about. I'm sure it's not important. Dad, if you're watching, which I know you aren't, I'll be done in like 30 minutes. Next game that we have here mentioned 2 not great pitching options, Chris Archer, Matt Manning. Neither of them strike out very many hitters, and a lot of them, at least in the past, Matt Manning, we haven't seen much from him at the big leagues this year, but he did struggle last year. Was a top pitching prospect going into last year and then just did not deliver results. If you remember, Adam, you and I chased Matt Manning quite a bit last year at cheap prices. It went very poorly for us. But he does have a pretty good matchup against the Detroit Tigers. So I want to start by asking you about Detroit. They haven't been good at all against right-hand pitching this year. Matt Manning wasn't good against anybody last year. Is there some tournament upside on both sides of this?
Wait, he's on Detroit.
Yeah, sorry. I had I have the pitchers mixed up here. Matt Manning against the Twins. How much exposure do you want to get to the Twins against?
I'll say that's the correct way to word it.
Yeah.
The Twins look good here. Manning, just like you said, former top pitching prospect, hasn't been particularly good. Last year, 18 starts in the major leagues, 5.13 xFIP, unbelievably low strikeout percentage. This year, dealt with an injury, 6 starts at AAA, 20 in the third innings total, 3.97 xFIP. He's thrown a total of 8 innings in the majors so far, 3.41 xFIP. But I'll believe that he has suddenly figured out how to pitch when I see it. And Minnesota is certainly a difficult landing spot here. They Right now, we have them with the fourth highest top stack percentage, but basically just lumped in with a bunch of other teams. They are getting a lot of ownership. We have them projected for the most ownership on the slate. So if that holds, it does push them back a little bit, just because they look similar enough to so many other teams. But it's still not like you're getting crazy ownership. Buxton at 16%, Correa at 12, $3,800 Jose Miranda at 11. Are the three highest owned guys. So it's a good value team. It's a very high upside spot. I like the Twins. Certainly will be paying attention to their ownership relative to some of these other teams, though.
Yeah, and right now the Minnesota Twins, and one thing that does help, which you mentioned earlier, the 14-game slate, it's not like there's any team picking up crazy ownership. The Twins are the most rostered team on the slate, but it's 10%, so it's not anything too absurd. Other side of the game, Chris Archer is going to be pitching against the Detroit Tigers. I don't like rostering Chris Archer. I don't like rostering the Tigers offense against right-hand pitching. But is there anything that stands out from you about this matchup, considering that Chris Archer's been bad and the Tigers have been terrible against righties?
Yeah, I mean, Chris Archer is not particularly good. Definitely another lineup we're going to have to see what this actually looks like by the time lock rolls around. Javi Baez could certainly be gone. They already traded Grossman. Riley Green will be there. They're not moving him. 4,100, pretty reasonable price tag for him. You're probably going to have Victor Reyes hitting second at 2,100. That's going to be a good value. You're not going to really need it on this slate because the pitcher pricing is so stupid, but if you do need it, 2,100 for Reyes is fine. Overall, though, I think it's just, I like the spot for Detroit because I don't think Chris Archer is good at this point. The problem really just kind of comes back to how broken the pitching pricing is, because if pitching pricing were correct and sharp and it was going to cost me $21,000 to play Corbin Burnes and Spencer Strider together, then you could make a case for getting to the Tigers because they're cheap and you can get really good pitching and hope the Tigers do well. But you can play Strider and Burnes together and just get to teams much better than Tigers. So that's going to drive down how much of them I get to, I would expect.
All right. So the most recent here on Juan Soto, John Morosi now saying Padres on the verge of acquiring Juan Soto. Deal is believed to be nearing its final stages. So that trade more or less looks finished. I very quickly went to sportsbooks to see that people are pounding the San Diego Padres, who are now 5-1 to win the World Series, which is absolutely absurd. So that's a little bit of an overreaction, but it does seem like that trade is going to be done sooner rather than later. Getting on to the next game here, Chicago Cubs, St. Louis Cardinals, and it is Adam Wainwright on the mound for St. Louis, Keegan Thompson on the mound for Chicago. Another spot where two pitchers that I'm not all crazy high on. Adam Wainwright obviously is the more favorable of the two pitchers, but not a lot of strikeout upside from him. He's also struggled a little bit as of late. I don't want to roster Wainwright. I don't really like the Cubs either, though.
Yeah, same boat. Wainwright's somebody I could certainly get to on some other slates because there are some strikeouts in the Cubs lineup. But here it's just kind of difficult for me to want to get to a guy with a 19.5% strikeout percentage. 7,500 is a little too cheap. He's projected for 8% ownership, 9% chance of being top two. So that makes sense to me. I wouldn't I would say I roster Wainwright before guys like Tyon or Gibson Gallen or Gilbert that we already talked about, but still just not somebody that I expect to really be prioritizing. As far as the Cubs go, I don't see much there. This is another lineup that certainly could look different. Contreras and Ian Happ are both pretty likely to be on the move.
Yeah, that definitely does seem to be a possibility. I don't know why the Cubs would keep them. So that's something that I think could potentially be expected. And then from the other side of the game, Keegan Thompson against the St. Louis Cardinals. When it comes to Keegan Thompson, he's been serviceable this year, and we know the Cardinals much better offense against left-handed pitching than right-handed pitching. Cardinals, they are not going to be trading for Juan Soto apparently, because that would have required them including Dylan Carlson in the trade, which is obviously impossible to ever do. So Cardinals offense, decent implied run total, but do you like them as a stack against Thompson?
I think they look okay. Thompson's not a bad pitcher. He's allowed a 176 expected ISO to righties this year, only 102 to lefties, 21.3% strikeout percentage, 4.39 xFIP. Right now, St. Louis is just another team in the middle of just in that group where you have the Mets running away right now with top stack percentage. Then you have Milwaukee a little behind them, and then just group of a bunch of teams between 4.5% and 5.5% in the top stack tool. St. Louis is one of them. They're projected for about 7% aggregate ownership, which is completely reasonable. Individually, O'Neill and Edman are leading the way at 12% ownership. I do really like Arenado and Goldschmidt. 5% projected ownership for both guys. They're expensive, so I think that's why they're a little bit lower owned. But as I mentioned before, you can make very high upside lineups with cheap pitching today because of the broken prices on Strider and Giolito in particular. So I don't think the price tag is going to be overly prohibitive. And it does make me, like being able to include those guys at modest ownership in a St. Louis stack.
Yeah, and by the way, because people are bringing it up in the chat about how the Cubs lineup could be really watered down. Like, yeah, there's a scenario where the Cubs lineup is so shitty that would make sense. That would make sense to roster Wainwright. As of right now, though, I think I'm going to just like pitchers like Giolito and Strider a lot more, to where it's just going to make it difficult for me to get to Wainwright at his lower strikeout rate.
Right. The answer, the answer all just comes back to the pricing being broken. If the pricing were correct, Adam Wainwright, if the pricing were correct on pitchers like Giolito and Strider, Adam Wainwright at 7,500 would be a very, very good play. As is, he's a contrarian play because those guys are, Giolito's cheaper and Strider's too close in salary for the massive gap that you're getting in strikeout percentage. If you make the Cubs lineup worse, then yes, Wainwright does project better, but the lineup isn't going to become so bad that it's making up for like a 15-point difference in strikeout percentage between Wainwright and Strider, and an 8-point difference between him and Giolito. It's going to make him look better. And you should get more Wainwright if those guys aren't in the lineup than you would if they are, but it's still not going to make him like project ahead of those guys. So the answer to like, why wouldn't you just play him, is because you can only roster 2 pitchers and opportunity cost still exists.
Yeah, and GQ's asking us, like, Giolito sucks. Yeah, I agree Giolito sucks, but he's priced like he sucks now, and he's against the shitty lineup.
I think that's the most insane take I've ever heard.
Which we'll talk more about Giolito later. He's definitely had his struggles
Actually,
this year.
Second most. King of Smack just said Strider should be 7K, so that's still the most insane. I don't know how we're possibly getting that Giolito sucks, though.
But also, as far as Giolito goes, whatever, we don't need to get too far ahead of ourselves. There's a couple games down the road, and we'll be talking about that. Before we do, have you been playing have you done any best ball drafts for NFL yet, Adam?
Yeah, like 100 and something.
Okay, I have not yet done them. I've just been busy with baseball and all the other stuff going on. But here we go. It's official. Juan Soto and Josh Bell traded to the Padres. There we go. Trade is now confirmed. Let's see if we have. Don't know who's going back yet, but this is going to be a really shitty Nationals lineup. Not that we didn't think it was going to be before, but now that the trade's official, how does this impact how you view Jacob deGrom against what is going to be a very terrible lineup?
He's going to look better than he would have if Soto and Bell were in. The overarching issue is still there, where no matter how well he's pitching, it's unlikely he's giving you, going 100 pitches in 7 innings or anything like that. But it does increase the chances of you just getting a 5-inning, 11 strikeout game from deGrom.
Yeah. But I hope we get a pitch count beforehand so I could really make informed decisions on deGrom and how to project and what to do with him as a pitcher. So hopefully that comes later on today. I wouldn't be surprised. We've seen the Mets with this before when pitchers have come back. And I'm pretty sure when Scherer was coming back from the injured list not long ago, they gave us a hard pitch count. I'm hoping that's the case again. But anyway, getting back to what I was asking before, because I was trying to do an ad read, and then Juan Soto it's very rude. The Nationals trade him in the middle of me trying to do an ad read here. The Nationals ended up getting, it was CJ Abrams, who's a well-regarded prospect, Robert Hassel, James Wood, I assume that's not the actor, and Yarlin Susana. I don't know very many prospects. I haven't heard of most of those guys.
I'm pretty sure Wood is highly regarded. Obviously, Abrams is, but no Mackenzie Gore, no Campusana. The Nats are just so bad at this.
That's a pretty modest package to get back for Juan Soto, who, by the way, has 3 years of team control left.
That's the thing. You don't have to just take the best package anybody's offering you at this deadline. You can move him in the offseason. God, the Nats are horrible.
Well, who knows? Maybe some of those guys will be better than Juan Soto. No, they won't be. It's going to be a bad trade. The Nationals will remain terrible. They had a core of Scherzer, Trey Turner, and Juan Soto. Really did not get that much in return from. I get they ended up winning a World Series. This is also a big market team. They have a lot of money to spend. The whole thing is weird to me.
Yeah, and Hassel's a top 100 prospect also. But the idea that the Padres were able to keep multiple of their top prospects while getting Juan Soto is crazy.
Yeah, this is good work by the Padres. They're going to be very good, a force to be reckoned with for the rest of the year, and a team that certainly makes sense for potential World Series aspirations. One thing I did notice as I was looking through the betting odds, the Padres have considerably better odds on DraftKings right now than they do on FanDuel. So if you guys are the odds just came down. So scratch that. But I was going to say that they did have odds that were not yet adjusted for Juan Soto, but now they've come down. But anyway, if you guys also
I was just quickly looking on the MLB pipeline prospect rankings. So Abrams not on it anymore because he had graduated, but he was at the top before, or close to the top before he went to the majors. They have Hassel, number 21 overall prospect, Wood, number 88, Susana not in the top 100.
All right, here we go. The most anticipated ad read in the history of the MLB Strategy Show. If you guys want to build some NFL best ball rosters, we have the packages to get it done over at Stokastic.com, and we're offering for $1. If you're looking to sign up right now over at Underdog to get in on their new puppy contests, which are really low buy-in tournaments, but also have really big prize pools, really big fantasy football contests, we have our best ball package available for $1 through Sunday, August 7th. So that's this upcoming Sunday. Usually costs $9 a week. We're offering for just $1. So get in on that, and then you could draft some best ball teams. Once again, it's only for $1. And then also make sure to also subscribe to our Stokastic Fantasy Football and Best Ball YouTube channels, where you get all the information from Lofty, Matt Savoca, Matt Kajeski, Nick Leprey, all those guys. They're bringing you the best information, and it's free on YouTube. So go over there, subscribe to those channels, and check out all of the content we have. All right, moving on with the rest of this slate. Next game here, Baltimore Orioles, Texas Rangers. Pitching matchup leaves a little bit to be desired. Jordan Lyles for Baltimore, Spencer Howard for Texas. Amongst these pitchers, Adam, do either of them interest you at all?
No.
There was a point in time where I think we were trying to talk ourselves into Spencer Howard. He just hasn't delivered the results at the big leagues, especially from a strikeout perspective, that he did in the minor leagues.
Yeah, and well, and Howard's one of those guys where, like, if you give me a slate where, like, pitching is really expensive at the top end and then the mid-range sucks and there's a bunch of bats that I want to get to, I'll just blindly hope that he puts together a game, at a cheap price tag. But that's not this slate. Like, I don't need to take on some guy that has just completely not shown the ability to pitch in the major leagues because I can just spend $1,000 more and get Giolito, or spend $1,500 more and get Wainwright, or spend $2,500 more and get the guy with the 36% strikeout percentage.
Yeah, I see it the exact same way. And this could be a really terrible Orioles lineup that I wouldn't be surprised if it is, because they already started trading players. They traded away Trey Mancini yesterday, which I'm sure you were sad to see him go, but probably feel good for Trey Mancini at the same point also, because he's a legitimate chance to win a championship this year now. But I don't see anything I really want to roster from this game from a pitching or hitting standpoint.
Still kind of interested in the Orioles here. The thing that sucks is that their salaries have come up. Mullins, Rutschman, Santander, all expensive. Mountcastle's still somehow like free, and Hayes is really cheap. But I mean, Spencer Howard is bad. Like, he hasn't ever been good in the majors. So far this year, limited sample, 250 expected ISO to righties, 208 to lefties. Go back to last year, 194 to righties, 164 to lefties. So I still think Baltimore's kind of interesting because of the matchup, but the salaries certainly aren't overly appealing. And then on the other side, I'm interested in the Rangers as well. I mean, Lyles is okay, but he's nothing special so far this year. 152 expected ISO to righties, 223 to lefties. I think that Seager looks good at 5K. I like Nate Lowe at 3,200. Those two really stand out individually, I think.
Yeah, King of Smack is saying that Jenna Jameson is the owner of the Washington Nationals. I have no clue if that's true, but well, maybe that's why they're getting fucked right now, because this trade is awful for them. Next game we have here to talk about, Kansas City Royals, Chicago White Sox. And we can talk about Lucas Giolito now. And I get it. He has been disappointing this year relative to how he's pitched in previous seasons. But the price has gotten so low for him now, especially on DK. There's just a breaking point where it makes sense to start playing somebody. Is Lucas Giolito a Cy Young caliber pitcher like he was the last couple of years? Absolutely not. He has a 5.14 ERA and a 4.55 expected ERA, but he still generates strikeouts. He's a 25.8% K rate. He's going up against what's likely to be a watered down Kansas City Royals lineup. And he's so cheap on DraftKings. He is $6,800 on DK. Over on FanDuel, he's $7,800, a little bit more expensive, but still with a strikeout upside, I think it's warranted. So, Adam, we're about to get trolled by the haters here, going to tell us that Lucas Giolito is unplayable because he absolutely sucks. Ooh. But why should we play him in this spot?
Mackenzie Gore also in the trade.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, okay, this looks better. Mackenzie Gore, CJ Abrams, Robert Hassel, James Wood, Harlan Susana. So Susana is just like a rookie ball throw-in type guy, like lottery ticket. But yeah, that's a much better return.
Yeah, so Mackenzie Gore being in it, that definitely, although Mackenzie Gore, I think, is hurt. His last start, he came out, all of a sudden his velocity dipped by like 5 miles per hour and they'd take him out of the game.
Yeah, but I mean, the Nats aren't going to be good for a couple of years anyway.
Yeah, probably ever, if we're being really
Well,
honest.
sure, yeah.
What was the? Oh yeah, so Giolito. We know
Uh,
what the case against him. He's giving up runs lately, right? That's clearly not ideal. Also, though, keep in consideration some of the matchups he had. Like his last start was against the Rockies in Coors Field. For that, Cleveland, and that start he did get roughed up a little bit. Start before that, he pitched at Cleveland, was decent. Start before that, did have 8 strikeouts against the Detroit Tigers. There have been a string of difficult outings for Giolito, but what are the cases for rostering him here?
I mean, the big thing is the $6,800 price tag. It makes it so like we don't even have to get into the argument over if he's good or not. Which maybe we disagree on, but at 6,800, it just doesn't matter. He's still got the 5th highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 25.8%. 3.75 xFIP is a run and a half below his ERA. 1.7 home runs per 9 is a lot, but like a 349 BABIP is high. He's seemingly gotten pretty unlucky this year. 262 actual ISO allowed to righties, 188 expected ISO. That's still an elevated expected ISO, but it's still 80 points lower than his actual. Lefties haven't really hit him for power this year anyway. So I think he's been a little unlucky this year. The strikeout stuff is still there. The matchup is good. Kansas City, the top of the order is good with Melendez, Witt, Perez, Witt if he's in, Perez, Pasquantino, but then it drops off pretty strongly. It's just a price tag where I don't think you even have to worry too much about whatever negatives you can find on Giolito.
Yeah, and there are negatives to be had there, but I do think they're a little bit overblown at this point. Like I said, he's definitely underperformed relative to expectations. But at the same time, too, how many pitchers are less expensive than him today on DraftKings? I'll sort here by salary. And the only pitchers that are less expensive than Giolito today are Chris Archer, Keegan Thompson, Cutter Crawford, Matt Manning, Spencer Howard, Bryce Wilson, Corey Abbott. He's better than those guys. Pitchers more expensive than him, like Jordan Lyles, Cole Irvin. These guys are more expensive than Lucas Giolito today. And even if he's been not what we expected, he's better than the pitchers priced around him.
Right, exactly.
All right. On the other side of the game, Brad Keller. Is he actually going to start for the Royals today? He was scratched from the start. I assumed he was getting traded yesterday. I still think that's on the table. Like, why scratch him and move him back one day, considering where the Royals are in the standings? I think he's not all that likely to pitch today. But matchup against the Chicago White Sox, they have an implied team total of nearly 5 runs. Assuming that Brad Keller is the starter, what do you make of the Chicago White Sox in this spot?
If the ownership holds where it is right now, I'm interested. I think Keller is just another like middle of the road pitcher where he's not very good from a DFS standpoint because he only strikes out 16% of hitters, 4.32 xFIP, but he's allowed less than 1 home run per 9 innings this year. He's held righties to a 133 expected ISO, 124 to lefties. The White Sox themselves have had plenty of issues scoring this year anyway, but I don't worry about that quite as much because they do have such a lot of these guys have such a track record of being, quality major league hitters. But Keller is somebody that I don't love picking on just because he typically does a good job of limiting power. But right now, the White Sox are only projected for about 2.5% aggregate ownership. The highest owned hitter on the team right now is Tim Anderson at 5.5%. They're in that same range in the top stacks tool with, in terms of likelihood of being the top stack, with Atlanta and Minnesota and St. Louis. And they're just getting a lot less ownership than those teams. So if that holds, even though I don't think it's super likely that they have success here, I'm happy to get to them at the reduced ownership.
Yeah, totally makes sense to me. Do need to keep an eye on who's actually going to start for the Royals today. Do not be surprised if Brad Keller gets traded and it's not ultimately the starter. Moving on to the next game, Houston Astros, Boston Red Sox. Christian Javier on the mound for Houston. We'll see what happens with Boston. They made a number of just odd trades yesterday that Adam and I talked about at the top of the show that didn't really make sense. I don't know if the Red Sox are coming or going. I know that they are fairly unlikely to make the playoffs, just considering that Rafael Devers is hurt right now and the team's overall underperformed this year. I think this could be a pretty easy matchup for Christian Javier. I know Luis Garcia yesterday was good, but not great. Javier, though, 33.6% K rate. I think he has a lot of strikeout upside in this spot. And another pitcher that just looks underpriced today on DK. He is only $8,700 when he should also be at least $1,000 more expensive. $9,700 over on FanDuel. How high of a priority is Javier for you?
Yeah, I mean, the price tag just doesn't make a lot of sense. He has a 32.8% strikeout, or sorry, 32.6% strikeout percentage, which is almost identical to Corbin Burns. His xFIP is a run worse than Burns, but 3.82 is, still solid. Walk percentage is higher. So I'm not making the case that he's as good a pitcher as Corbin Burns, but the strikeout percentage is almost identical, and you're getting a $1,400 discount. So at least from an upside standpoint, I think that's obviously too cheap. And the Red Sox, like you said, we don't know what this lineup's going to look like, but we know it's not going to have Devers. It's not going to have Story. It's just a middle of the road, mediocre offense, a reasonably priced Javier. It's difficult to say like, oh, I'm just going to jam in Javier because that would necessarily mean getting like less Burns or less Gausman or less Strider. But I agree with what we're projecting the field to do, where, close to 30% ownership on Javier because he is clearly one of the best pitchers.
Eric Hosmer also headed to the Nationals, so now surely the franchise is saved because Eric Hosmer will go and he'll hit so many ground balls that the team, it'll be impossible for them to lose. So on the other side of the game, Cutter Crawford pitching for Boston. I've kind of liked Cutter Crawford this year. I think he's gone a little bit underrated by the public. There's never really been a time that he's picked up any kind of considerable amount of ownership, 25.1% K rate, but he's going up against the Houston Astros team. And I actually like the Houston side of this game because even though I've been on Cutter Crawford in a lot of his recent starts, there's only 3% ownership going to Houston. They got a nice upgrade yesterday by adding Christian Vazquez at catcher. So I assume that he's going to be the primary catcher now over Martin Maldonado. This is going to be an upgrade.
You forgot their best upgrade yesterday.
Which?
Mancini.
Oh, Mancini. Yeah. But I assume he's not in the lineup today, though.
Why?
Because he just got traded last night. Christian Vazquez, I think, will be in the lineup just because he was already on the Red Sox.
Yeah, I'm assuming Mancini's there.
Okay. Well, if he's there also, even more reason for the Astros offense to be upgraded. And it's going to be a really deep lineup. Like as is, the Astros lineup when healthy had a lot of danger in it. And now they've got Vazquez and Mancini, potentially both of them in the lineup tonight. 3% ownership is not enough for Houston in this spot.
So I did want to clarify one thing because John Warner pointed out in the chat. Devers is expected back today. So
is he?
Yeah, I said he wouldn't be in the lineup. Doesn't change a ton. Like, obviously, it makes it worse for Javier, but not enough that he would go from like a really good pitcher to not really good. There's also a non-zero chance that he's not on the Red Sox by tonight. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out. As far as the Houston side goes, though, I'm with you. I think Cutter Crawford is fine. I think he's okay. Limited sample this year, 128 expected ISO to righties, 227 to lefties. But Houston's really, really good, and this lineup just got deeper. You already had, Altuve, Gurriel, Alvarez, Tucker that are like always good plays. Bregman is out on paternity leave, but if Mancini's in this lineup, he's 3,200. Houston is like the perfect park for Mancini to land in as well. He would, if he had played every game in Houston this year, he'd have like 22 home runs. If he had played every game in Baltimore, he'd have 11. Houston was like the best park in all of baseball for Mancini, according to StatCast. So really good landing spot for him. Cheap price tag. Christian Vazquez, obviously a better catcher in your stacks than Maldonado, although he is more expensive. But I think, if Mancini's in this lineup, getting in, Altuve, Gurriel, Alvarez, Mancini, Tucker stack, or, changing Gurriel to Vazquez or Diaz or Pena, it really just lengthens this lineup and makes them look really good at not a lot of ownership.
Yeah, and King of Smack asking if Tommy Pham is going to be in the Red Sox lineup. I'm kind of thinking that Tommy Pham might be washed. He's 34 years old now. He has a 92 WRC plus this year. Last year was at 102, which is about league average. It was 79 the year before. I don't think Tommy Pham is some crazy upgrade to the Boston lineup.
No, I agree. He's not is he a better hitter than Christian Vazquez? Probably. But
let's see, Christian. Well, also, now it's going to be Vazquez did DH a lot, and now he's going to be Vazquez has a 111 WRC plus this year, 77 last year, 115.
That's actually higher than I expected. But Pham since 2020 has only played 31 games in 2020, but 79, 102, and 92 WRC plus. Like, the guy fell off of a cliff after 2019.
Which doesn't make sense. He's 34 years old with a long injury history. Sure. You get to a point where you just wouldn't expect him to be as good. It's still a good spot for me when it comes to Christian Javier. I like Houston as a low-owned stack. Now, the next game to hit on the slate, is it fair to assume that Noah Syndergaard, we probably don't expect him to pitch today for the Angels, even though he's the listed starting pitcher?
Yeah, there's a good chance he's not pitching. If he does pitch, you can get some. I mean, he is facing Oakland, but the issue is just that he doesn't offer the same sort of strikeout stuff as guys that are not that much more expensive than him.
Yeah. So when it comes to Noah Syndergaard, let's just assume he is pitching here. Would you be interested in him at all since he's pitching against Oakland and he's so cheap?
Wait, what'd you ask?
If Syndergaard is indeed the starting pitcher, would you have any interest in rostering him just considering he is cheap in a plus matchup?
Oh, I mean, yeah, sort of a little bit. Kind of like a worse Wainwright, I think.
Yeah. I don't think I've rostered Syndergaard once the entire season. I think I could be talked into it tonight, though. And both the pitchers in this game are kind of similar. 18% K rate for Syndergaard, 17% for Cole Irvin. Both of them have fairly easy matchups. Is Cole Irvin somebody that would interest you at all?
Not particularly on this slate. He is facing the Angels, so there's plenty of strikeout upside. He's not a particularly good strikeout pitcher himself, only striking out 17% of hitters this year, 4.3 xFIP. It's just not the slate that I see myself doing it.
Yeah, if I had to roster one of the pitchers, it would be Syndergaard over Irvin. But once again, I really don't think Syndergaard ultimately ends up pitching today. As for the Angels offense, any interest in them against Cole Irvin? It's been tough sledding for the Angels without Mike Trout.
Yeah, I'm not particularly interested in getting to the Angels. Their offense is so bad. Like you said, no Mike Trout. 170 expected ISO allowed to lefties for Irvin. So, Shohei Ohtani still a very good play. 211 to righties. Taylor Ward at 3,800 is pretty cheap, but there's just so many good spots on this slate. I don't see myself really getting to that one much.
All right, couple games left to hit on here. Next one, Colorado Rockies and San Diego Padres. Do us a favor, guys, as we wrap up the show. Like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and check out our content later on in the day. The MLB Deeper Dive and Live Before Lock. This slate is going to be probably the one that changes the most from the morning to the time we get to lock, just with the trade deadline coming up and all the different stuff that's going to be going on. But Jose Urena is on the mound for the Colorado Rockies. He's been fairly miserable this year. He's coming off a start where he got absolutely obliterated by the Los Angeles Dodgers, which I think more or less should be expected for most of Urena's starts at this point in his career. His ERA is now up to 4.67. The ZiPS projection on Jose Urena, I pointed this out in his last start. I've never seen anything like this. They project him to have a 7.09 ERA the rest of the year. This might be the worst pitcher in baseball right now. He's going up against a Padres team that while Juan Soto won't be playing today, it's an offense that's going to be looking a lot better in the near future. And at least as of now, it is a decent looking offense. I can't wait until we see that Padres lineup with Machado, Soto, and Fernando Tatis all in it. But even without those guys, I'm going to be stacking them today against Urena.
Yeah, I think you can kind of just blindly play against Urena. We have him projected for a 4% or 3.5% top stack percentage, 3.5% ownership share. I think that's all fine. Machado looks good. Cronenworth looks good. Those two in particular. But then, Profar, Voit, Mazzara, those are going to be pretty reasonably priced plays as well. So, Urena's bad. The Rockies or the Padres have nearly a 5 implied run total. They're another team that I just throw into that mix with Atlanta, Minnesota, St. Louis, Chicago.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. Probably one of the teams I'm going to get to the most. We're going to see some difference in ownership later on in the day, but it's hard to imagine there's going to be a scenario where I don't want to stack against Urena unless the Padres are going to look like with 20% ownership or something like that. Starting for them is going to be Ross Kinnear. I believe I pronounced that correctly, but maybe not. What do you know about him as the starter for the Padres tonight?
He's been back and forth between the bullpen and starting at AAA this year. Most recent appearance was July 28th at AAA. He went 4 innings, faced 15 batters. So not expecting him to go particularly deep into this game. Not somebody that I'm considering from a DFS standpoint. At AAA this year, 22.7% strikeout percentage, 5.76 xFIP in his 8 innings in the majors so far, 3.22 xFIP. Steamer projects him for a 4.78 FIP. ZiPS is at 4.96. Kind of just looks like a guy.
Yeah, so not going to be able to roster him then if he's going to pitch limited innings. And then I very rarely like to roster the Rockies offense away from Coors Field. Safe to assume that's going to be the same for you on this slate?
Yeah. There's just enough offenses that I like. It's going to be pretty difficult to want to get to them. Plus, we aren't going to have Chris Bryant, so that waters down the lineup a little bit.
Yeah, Chris Bryant on the injured list with a foot injury, got scratched yesterday. A lot of people thought he had been traded, but no, nobody wants that horrific, nearly $200 million contract that the Rockies just inked him to for no reason. He's just hurt right now. Last game on the slate, talk about Dodgers and Giants. We've got Tyler Anderson on the hill for the Dodgers, 20.9% K rate for him. He's been very solid, one of the better years of his career. And then Alex Wood, who's also having a solid season for the Giants and also generating some strikeouts, 23.6% K rate. But I can't really get behind either of the pitchers in this spot or the offenses for any kind of real significant amount of exposure. When you consider the pitchers are both decent, but not the strikeout upside of the other top end pitchers on the slate. The game's being played in San Francisco, which is a pitcher friendly park. Does anything stand out to you in this matchup?
No, it's kind of the same thing. You know, there are a lot of slates where I'd be willing to take a chance on an $8,900 Tyler Anderson here, or, you know, maybe even a cheap Alex Wood, despite the difficult matchup. But you just don't need to really do it on this slate. You know, if you need a pitcher at $7,600 where Alex Wood is, you can go to Adam Wainwright for $7,500. You know, he's getting 9% ownership instead of 3%, but who really cares? If you need a pitcher at $8,900, you know, yeah, Anderson is very low owned at 6%. He's like the only guy. Oh, you know, he's getting a lot less ownership than Strider and Gausman and those guys in that price range, but you're probably not going to have enough ownership going to the hitters in your lineup that you really care all that much. So he's kind of just like, to me, a Tristan McKenzie type guy in that price range, where if he ended up in a lineup like at really low ownership, cool, but I just don't think it's going to end up really happening. And then from an offensive standpoint, the Dodgers are always playable just because they're so good, but Alex Wood certainly isn't a pitcher I'm looking to actively target against, especially in San Francisco. 3.24 xFIP this year, 23.6% strikeout percentage, 152 expected ISO to righties. It's just mostly a game where I doubt I get to much of anything.
All right, so that is going to wrap it up for the show. Just one final thing to point out to you guys before we leave is that this is going to be a slate where a lot of things change in terms of player projections, top stack odds, top pitchers odds, all of that, because it's a trade deadline. A lot of players are going to be on different teams. There's going to be some watered down, really weak looking lineups. So if you want to be up to date on all of the information we have over on the site, you could sign up for a Stokastic Plus Platinum Pass and get the weekly pass for the first time using the promo code MLB Strategy Show. That's all one word, all capital letters, to get 50% off your first week of the package. So this is going to be a time where I do think this is going to be really imperative to get all the updated information throughout the day. So if you're interested in it, sign up using that promo code MLB Strategy Show, get yourself 50% off, stop guessing, start winning, join Stokastic Plus today. With that, we're done for the day. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out all the content we have later. Have fun today, guys. Enjoy the trade deadline, and good luck.